Good evening. This is Jeff Partridge here at Capital Community College. We're broadcasting live tonight from room 307. And we're really glad that you came to join us tonight. I am the chair of the Humanities Department here, and I also run the Hartford Heritage Project, which has been organizing these talks for 3 years now with the help of Bill Hosley, who's been our artistic curator for that. Tonight, I just want to say a few things. First of all, a few words of thanks. Connecticut Humanities has given us a grant to run this series, so I want to thank Connecticut Humanities for their support of important lecture series like this one. I want to thank Capital Community College and the Capital Community College Foundation for their support as well. All right, so I would like to introduce Bill Hosley now. Bill's a good friend of Capital Community College and a wonderful friend of the Hartford Heritage Project. In fact, we've been doing place-based education here since 2011, and we've been calling it place-based education ever since Bill came and gave a talk to inaugurate the Hartford Heritage Project, and he used the term place-based education. They said, "That's what we're doing?" It is what we're doing. So I want to, Bill has been a great help to us. He also, as many of you may know, Bill was a curator at the Wadsworth Atheneum in the 1980s and 90s. In the 90s into the 2000s, he was the director of Connecticut Landmarks. And he also curated an exhibit on Colt when he was at the Wadsworth Atheneum that spawned the national park that we now have. So one other thing about Bill is that he loves the north end of Hartford, and in 2 weeks we're going to be having a really great lecture on that from Fiona Vernal. So I'm going to pass it off to Bill. Thank you, Bill.
Jeff, it's great to be here in year 3. I know everybody watching, and we're all going through this kind of difficult time with this pandemic. It's nothing most of us have ever experienced before, and it's I don't know about you, but I think it makes hopefully all of us yearn for a stronger sense of community and social connectivity, and that will come. So thank you for joining us this way, and let's get on with this show. Travelers Tower and Icon turns 100. The skyscraper and the 20th century are synonymous and were that century's most stunning architectural achievement. Skyscrapers celebrated modern building technology and totally changed the scale and concept of cities. No other building type incorporates so many forces of the modern world. Rapid increases in building height were made possible by advances in fireproofing, metal framing, and the passenger elevator, with less glamorous improvements in footings and foundations, plumbing, heating, lighting, and ventilation. This is the story of Hartford's first and greatest skyscraper, Travelers Tower. Let's have a look. The building itself is impossible to miss. I remember years ago visiting an old-timer friend in East Windsor Hill and her pointing out how if you look downriver, what you see is travelers. It was and is a symbol of the city and region. When it was finished, it was the 7th tallest building in the world and remained the tallest building in New England until 1965. And from every angle, looking up from the sculpture of George Washington at the Wadsworth Atheneum and just different angles, it's a majestic presence. Oh, there's George. Yeah, and I love that. That would be a good if we did a scavenger hunt. Who can find the bas-relief of George Washington? That's right on the Atheneum building, and then that picture taken on the right from the ancient burying ground at night. And this picture on the left shows City Hall. We'll get back to that in a moment. And then actually from the Atheneum, excuse me, on the left is City Hall, looking at travelers, and then from the right, on the right is the Atheneum looking up. And the view of the iconic umbrella on the new plaza and I-Quilt Greenway, it's hard to look at this picture and not think, wow. How it started. In 1845, a young man from the marble districts of the Litchfield Hills arrived in Hartford just as the city's new rail line helped trigger an industrial boom that, by 1870, made Hartford one of the richest cities in America. At age 22, James Patterson established himself as a manufacturer of monuments and gravestones and an importer and dealer of the best American and Italian marble. He expanded into building construction. His monuments, architectural and memorial, helped define the Gilded Age nationwide and some of 19th century's most celebrated landmarks. Patterson was a relentless self-improver who studied geology, mastered half a dozen languages, traveled to Egypt to study ancient sepulchral art, and in 1859 was commissioned by Sam Colt and a group of Hartford subscribers to travel to Italy and retrieve the effects of the recently deceased sculptor Edward Bartholomew, shown in the upper right. Patterson delayed his return to study painting and sculpture in Italy and began forming a collection of old and new master paintings. Monument maker, builder, linguist, economist, politician, art collector, insurance magnate, Patterson was eventually honored honorary degrees from Yale and Williams and was a trustee of Brown University, Wadsworth Athenaeum, and more. It was on this trip in 1859 that he first learned about accident insurance and learned about setting rates based on scientific data via the Railway Passengers Assurance Society of London. So he comes home to Hartford and in his spare time founds this other business. Well, this is the monument shop that was within walking distance of the Ash and Terry house and almost next door to the Keeney Clock Tower in the north end of Hartford. And this is where the monument business that he ran was located. And just to get through some of this, he designed the earliest of the Colt monuments in Old North Cemetery, the most prominent Colt monument in Cedar Hill, and really made a national reputation for himself with some of these monuments. On the right, center right, is the Worth Monument in New York City, and the Gallaudet Monument, now gone, but was on the present site on Asylum Avenue where the School for the Deaf was. And then on the left is the David Worcester Monument in Danbury. All of these in the 1850s at a time when nobody had ever seen monuments of this scale. It was very cutting edge stuff. Then he designed the monuments for the national cemeteries at Antietam on the left and Gettysburg on the right. 1 million people a year stand and view this Gettysburg monument. It was the largest figural, the Antietam's figure on the left was the largest figural statue ever made in America before the Statue of Liberty. He collected art. This was the first loan show ever mounted at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in 1868. And his cousins, I think, the Goodwins, hired him in 1870 to build the Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company building on Main Street, right downtown, long gone, but what a towering work of art this was, complete with the colossal figures of insurance and plenty. These were allegorical figures in sculpture that were part of the architectural design program of that building. He also built, but does not design, the Connecticut State Capitol, the Library of Congress, and the plinth, which you can see is almost taller than the figure of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, but the stonework beneath the statue was a Patterson Hartford production in New York. So this is a guy with a full rich career before he got into insurance, but that did happen. 1863, Travelers has founded their first facility was, not surprisingly, near the railroad station, which you can see on the slide on the right. And they started small, then they moved to Prospect Street and bought the house. The original offices were in the house of Henry Ellsworth, whose famous father was a founding father, member of the first U.S. Senate, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. His name was Oliver Ellsworth. Henry Ellsworth lived in Hartford, and his house later became the Travelers' offices. And this is an amazing picture because you really can't tell that this house is still embedded. These are all the additions. They kept adding wings and getting bigger and larger. And the insurance thing took off with industrialization. That's a story in itself. eventually, by the 1870s and 80s, Hartford really was the insurance capital, in many ways still is the insurance capital. And you can see some of the office buildings. None of these survived, but this is what Hartford's insurance industry looked like by 1890 or so. And almost all of it on Main Street, on the present site of Travelers. Well, in 1906, they decided to build a new building, and they started. This became Travelers Tower, and it is all still there if you look at it, but it doesn't quite look like this, because first they built the 1906 wing, then in 1913, they doubled it, and this location was really the center of life for Hartford and what a golden age boom era that was in the early part of the 20th century. These are World War I parades up the center of town, and you can see the Travelers Building was there. This picture, which belongs to the Travelers Archive, I've never seen another print of it. It shows this emerging civic center in about 1915, before the tower part went on, but after City Hall on the far right, and then the Morgan wing of the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the center there. So you've got Travelers Travelers on the far left. Aetna was the tall building right next door where the Travelers Plaza now is, and then the Wadsworth Building, the Morgan Building, and City Hall. So this is a moment when Hartford is really climbing out of this rural agrarian country and becoming a city. I mean, it's really exciting stuff. And as you can see, the building boom elicited bragging rights about the scale of these companies and the amount of money they were making and their national influence, and it was just a boom era for insurance. Well, this shows the floor plan of Travelers, and you can see the 1906-7 wing, 1913 wing, and then they added additions in 1919, 28, 58, 1964. What's going on at this moment is the skyscraper movement, and the most famous building possibly in the world, but certainly in the United States, when it was completed in 1913, was the Woolworth Building in New York City. Designed by Cass Gilbert, who did a lot of work actually in Connecticut, and it was the tallest building in the world from 1913 until 1930, rising 792 feet, officially opened in 1913. And this is a list of Travelers. You can see is the seventh one down, a list of the tallest buildings in the world. 5 of the 7 were in New York, 1 of the 7 was in Philadelphia, and there is Hartford at number 7. And then a year ago, before the pandemic, this is so thrilling. We went down to New York City and took a tour. They gave tours of the Woolworth Building. That is incredible. And we had an hour and a half to go inside, upstairs, through the elevators, and this tour guide was fabulous, and it was just great. The Woolworth Building is really cool, and everybody in Hartford would have known about this at the time. So this was kind of the inspiration behind the Travelers Tower. Don Barber, shown in the center here, was the architect. Yale class in 1893. He had apprenticed in the offices of Carrara and Hastings in New York, and worked closely with Cass Gilbert, who I've already mentioned. He set up his own firm in New York in 1900, and among the projects he did in Hartford, he was the architect behind the Hartford Times building, and also the State Library and Supreme Court building across the street from the Capitol, and this was 1909. And so Don Barber was a well-known figure here. And there were several, as my friend Tony Mott is in the audience here tonight. He's an architect. He probably is familiar with clients that don't always like the first draft of what you submit. And these are some of the drawings that Travelers Archives has showing examples of what they were some plans that, they didn't build them, but these were in the works as they were considering it. And so, and then they have all these architectural drawings that show the first floors we've already seen. And then the incredible, the iron superstructure, again, iron technology enables this. The floor plans, all very interesting. And then this rare photograph of the Travelers Tower building going up under construction in 1918, conceived a year or two earlier. Alas, the U.S. entered World War I in April of 1918. The building was largely completed and scaffolded, but there was a kind of a moratorium on construction for a period during the war. And you can see the letter from the State Council of Defense dated October 1918. So there were some road bumps on the way to building the tower that finally completed the edifice. And look, these are tough times, the pandemic. I mean, nobody's feeling good about any of this. But I think 1919 was worse. They had a pandemic, the Spanish flu, that killed 50 million people. World War I was surging. Women's suffrage, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Treaty of Versailles, the rise of Hitler and Mussolini, anarchist terrorism, blowing up buildings in New York. Yikes. This is what was going on while Travelers Tower was going up. It certainly made news, and big news, at the time. Hartford was so proud of this, that the insurance thing, was just on a tear, just booming. And so a lot of news stories, and the sketch of glorious days to come when Europe and Asia will be suburbs of the city, when hourly trips to Peking by way of the poles and an 8-cent fare to Boston. These are kind of, is that fake news? I don't know what they would call it, but those are real copies of newspapers. And then when they opened the tower, this is the first time humans had a chance to get a bird's eye view of the city, unless you went up in a balloon. So you go up in the tower, and the tower was for decades a tourist attraction. People would go up and they'd go in there and look around, and a beautiful view of the Connecticut River. You can see up to Mount Tom and the Mount Holyoke region. And anyway, people love that. So that made a lot of news. And the heart of the city from Travelers Tower, these are illustrations in newspapers, and how proud everyone was. And, it wasn't just that. The city was bursting with optimism and civic pride. So much was happening so fast. The Bulkley Bridge in 1909 was a very big deal, and I know my friend Jenna is here, that there are tickets to the opening in the Isham House? They're in a drawer somewhere. I'm sure the sisters went. It was a very big event. Even 10 years later, they're still talking about the opening of the bridge. That was a big deal. And then this insane little picture of dirigibles, and they're imagining Hartford's business section 200 years from now. So they were fantasizing, they loved it. And these are little articles, they were so proud. I love this story about artists in Windsor dazzled by the visual appeal of a skyscraper you could see from miles away. Travelers Tower, new theme for Windsor artists. And the artists came, the photographers, was there ever another building in Hartford that inspired such artfulness? These are only a few of there are only 5 buildings that inspired such poetry: the old State House, the new State Capitol, Colt's Armory, and the Soldiers' Arch, and then Travelers Tower. Those are the big 5 that artists and poets have written about, and a lot to see. This painting at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, the paint was still wet as the scaffolding was coming down. They were so excited. This view, by the way, you cannot see today because there's another building blocking the view from the old State House to the tower. But I get goosebumps looking at that. Yeah. That really captures a world of the past. And this was by James Goodwin McManus from 1919. And this is one of my favorite Hartford paintings by Margaret Cooper, painting of downtown before the Park River was sunk underground. But Travelers again, tower looming large from Bushnell Park. Then in the 1921, Travelers hired this New York artist, Vernon Bailey, renowned New York illustrator with an international reputation, who was engaged to this amazing series of illustrations of the beauty of Hartford, but every picture has to have Travelers in it, and you can see. It makes, I get emotional looking at these. This is what a beautiful walking city this was before they dropped 2 interstate highways in the middle of it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still, this is a world not entirely lost, and we should cherish every day. Walter Corder, another artist, I think in the 50s. These are great views. I particularly love the one on the right, taken from the Connecticut River with the boats in the foreground. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. 700 Main Street is the address, and this is the original front door. If I had a magic wand, they would reopen that. What's behind it, we'll see in a moment, would be a fabulous Hartford attraction, wonderful place to tell the history of insurance, but not being done presently, but maybe someday. That opens up into this, and there is, someday we're going to get, hopefully, a tour, something you can sign up for. But anyway, just a beautiful building, lots of architectural details. Every time you turn around, there's a portrait of our beloved founder, James Madison, who was gone by the time he died in, I think, 1901 or 1904. So, you know, the business continued on, and but they always honor him as the founder. You know, I just love sculptural details. I'm not wild about steel and glass modernist boxes, but I love skyscrapers, and I particularly love skyscrapers like Woolworth and Travelers that are ornamental, that have real artistry to them. And these are just some details, photographs from inside. Classical details of, in bronze, and then you know, marble art in architecture. This was marble imported from France. You know, it's not everywhere, but there are spaces within the Travelers Building that have these glorious materials. And you know, it's funny. Hartford does not have, it had, but does not have a World War I monument anywhere in the city. There's Civil War monuments, 3. There's a great Spanish-American War monument in Bushnell Park, but this is the best we've gotten. It's inside Travelers, and it's talking about Travelers employees that went off to the war. It's really, really something to see. And then this is Batterson Hall, as they call it. Then lower picture, and then now. And it's used for meetings and various things. The public rarely sees this. They also commissioned from a Alvin Polasek, a Czech Republic immigrant sculptor in I forget what year this was. Let me see if I got my notes. I guess in the 19 teens or 20s, a statue, a sculpted figure of James Madison that is inside the Travelers Building. They've gone through different trademarks, and at one point, the knight was, it was branding architect. Before there was an umbrella, there was this armor-clad knight shielding from danger. It's still apparent in the architecture. They called him Tubor, and he was adopted in 1905 as Travelers' trademark, as an advertising symbol, and advertising slogans like the full armor contract was what they call it, or protection, symbolizing honor and honesty, used on and off until the umbrella was introduced in the 1960s. And big security vaults in the basement where they stored bonds and investments. These aren't used today because all that stuff is paperless, but that's a big safe. Some really cool stuff to see. And then you get up in the tower, and honestly, the coolest thing on earth is being up in the tower and enjoying that panoptic sublime, that view, 360 degrees, where you can walk around and see the river and the cityscape. And I'm sure the Baltimore Cookhouse is in there somewhere. Image management and advertising. The building itself was part of the branding of Travelers. That's one of the reasons but Travelers has always been, I mean, it's not just because the company was founded by an artist. which is a little detail that people don't realize often. But, advertising is art, and they were good at it. They're still good at it. And this is in the early 1860s, some of the advertising that they did in the 1870s, different. I had such a great time pawing through the archives at Travelers. I really had carte blanche for this project, and there's a lot of cool stuff that I didn't see. And these are a little wild. National pride and reconciliation. After the Civil War, there was this reconstruction, this brutal attempt to get the North and the South, which we're still, God help us, still dealing with, to love each other and to treat each other like fellow countrymen. Who'd think an appeal to North and South in this way? By that time, the nation was saturated in remembrance. These are photographs of the famous generals, both North on the left and South, and these were used in Travelers advertising. But they also did a series about authors and eminent women. So, this just really clever stuff that went on in the world of advertising. And they loved the World's Fairs were a great place to connect with a large public. This is some of their advertising for the World's Fairs in the 1890s in Chicago. And car culture, but Hartford, of course, got involved in insuring automobiles when automobiles were taking off. And you made it through another year without hurting or killing yourself. Lucky you. You're going to need auto insurance. So that's what we did. And then in the 1930s, they embraced Courier Knives, long ahead of the curve. Courier Knives had belonged to a century earlier, but their calendars became this iconic advertising thing. People that know nothing else about Travelers might know about the Courier Knives calendars. And they have a large collection of Courier Knives prints that they use, a museum quality and quantity of Courier Knives pictures in their collection. They also embraced Rogers Group's story for another day. That Courier Knives really took off and were more dominant, but that picture in the upper right there is like a little area inside the building where they displayed these collections that they amassed. They had all kinds of little promos. You can find this stuff on eBay, promote ads, and the building itself. I'd like to get one of those little Travelers Tower paperweights. Those, I think, though, if you find one on eBay, you might be set back a few $100. But this stuff was common. They handed them out as premium, and then this is so great. I assume this was a news story that said boldness, courage, but they got Neil Armstrong to sign a contract a policy for insuring his trip to outer space. I thought I was going to faint when I was up in the executive suite at Travelers and stumbled on this. They bought this at either G. Fox or Sage Allen. Somebody went out on a lunch break, came home with this umbrella, and that is the artifact that inspired the logo, and they've still got it in a glass case. Wow. And what a big deal that became. The umbrella logo became a building and an exhibit at the 1964 World's Fair. This shows Donald Desky and Robert Moses and the planners of the World's Fair, because Travelers was one of the exhibitors at the famous New York World's Fair. And they had this, they hired this guy, Harry Shapiro from Columbia University, a professor of anthropology, to develop the outline for this Triumph of Man exhibit. And it was, a little bit of triumphalism, kind of dated in its period, but this is what you got if you went to the Travelers exhibit in at the World's Fair. And I've given tours of Hartford downtown sculpture from time to time. It never occurred to me to include this umbrella on the outside of Travelers in the location where you see it. But what it really is, and it was exactly contemporaneous with the high watermark of pop art. And so it really is a pop art reference. And when you think of Jasper Johns and Andy Warhol, it's all happening right then, 1963, 1962. And it's been 60 years. And guess what? It's in a way that umbrella logo, this is a lunchroom at Travelers, it's still kind of cooler than ever. And they have, this is a painting by an abstract artist named Bill Richards, commissioned in 1985. This is an enduring symbol, and of course their famous golf championship. You can get the golf, you probably find those on eBay too with the umbrella. So it's all cool stuff. Travelers also had a sense of history. Travelers and a sense of place. As a monument and gravestone maker, James Patterson certainly did. I love this bit of folklore right on the building near the front door. The building is baronial classicism, built of granite from Patterson's westerly quarries. But for the life of me, I can't explain the melting ice motif on the column. Somebody will have to explain that. But there is this plaque that talks about on this site was the Sanford Tavern. So there's this sense of continuity in history, and the Charter Oak, and this peel, iron peel, was apparently found when they were building the building. It was a part of the archaeology of digging up the site. So the archives at Travelers actually would make a great exhibit at the Connecticut Historical Society or someplace. 1964, they commissioned this statue by Francis Wadsworth, titled The Safe Arrival, which, it's about insurance. He who brought us here sustains us still, is the Latin version, is the state motto. And the idea of traveling, settling the West in 1636 is hardwired to the core of Hartford's. So they had this sense of history. In 1936, they commissioned this pictorial map that shows all the building lots in the 17th century, but also where the Dutch had their settlement in the lower left, and then they just dropped Travelers Tower right down in the middle. Interestingly, if you ever get out to Lebanon, Connecticut, Catherine Day, founder of the Mark Twain House and Stowe Day Foundation, at her expense moved Daniel Wadsworth's carriage barn, which was being demolished to create the pavilion where Travelers is. Moved it to Lebanon, Connecticut, where it is today, and there's a little plaque out there, and that view on the left shows what that site looked like, into the 1950s. After Etna had left, but before those buildings were removed. And just cool stuff. This box on the lower right were a cabinet that was used in train stations to sell the original policies. The desk in the upper right was James Patterson's desk, and in the lower right is a Colt revolver Sam Colt gave to James Patterson as a token of their mutual friendship. All of this stuff in the Travelers archives. Of course, the building has been a backdrop for presidential visits and so much history. And it's been used on the cover of their various publications for many, many years. And it's interesting, in terms of the inner workings, I learned stuff. The insurance industry employs more women than men, and there are many industries that can't say that. But Hartford has a fascinating, underreported women's history story in the fact that there were so many opportunities for women because of not just the insurance industry, but especially the insurance industry. It was a lot cleaner and safer than working in the dark satanic mills in eastern Connecticut. And you could take the trolleys down from the female-only apartment buildings in the North End and show up at work, and they had all these, really almost time sounds like a country club, all these, the girls club, the travelers club, lots of things to engage and make employees, feel, they have bowling clubs, all kinds of stuff that they did. And all of that's in the archives. And of course, this is the year we are honoring and celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage, and what a great story that is. And hopefully the Hartford History Series will continue in years forward. One of our speakers later on is talking about the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in Hartford. There's so many of these exciting, to me, underreported stories. And just, again, images of the interior, the evolution of a building, a publication they produced in 1913 shows the liability department's workroom. And the liability, and then the interior library. Some of those spaces are still very much intact. Certain jobs within the insurance industry were gender segregated. I think there were other jobs in the history of it that weren't, but there's so much, again, to learn about that. Of course, Hartford also manufactured typewriters, and you don't have an insurance industry without typewriters. So a lot of people good at math skills. Also, WTIC in the 1920s, from the birth of radio, 50,000 watt station, longest reach in New England, linked the tower with the highest new technology of its age. And they used to broadcast from the tower itself. And continuing interest of artists, these are paintings, relatively recent, where the Traveler's Tower factors into the background. Connecticut icon souvenir plate, the kind of stuff you can find on eBay or flea markets, and you look at the landmarks, the whole state. You got the Capitol in the middle, the old State House in the lower left, and there's Travelers on the right, Etna on the left. I think that's Trinity College. Anyway, these are the buildings by which Connecticut was known. Hartford loves travelers. Conclusion. My favorite author is the poet and essayist Wendell Berry. And he wrote this: the experience of growing up in a community in which virtually everybody was passionately interested in the quality of a local product was, I now see, a rare privilege. Knowing our way around insurance, whether you work in the business or not, is part of having that essential sense of civic attachment that makes the world go round. Thank you all for tuning in. Questions, comments? Thank you.
Bill, we have a question we have a question from Douglas Ovian, and Douglas, you said something about a name misspelling. I think it was on Douglas, so I hope I got that right. Douglas is saying, what do you think of the most recent changes to the plaza? I greatly appreciate all the money that Travelers continue to spend on the building, but I like the old one better, he says.
Yeah. Time goes on. I think that 60s pavilion looked kind of dated. I think the green space connectivity, my friend Tony is here. He knows probably more about all this. He may have actually helped engineer some of it, but I like it, and I love the obviously the presence that you see here of the umbrella, but I think the I quilt and the greenway, it has added value. We obviously continue to face challenges in terms of making Hartford the walking city we want it to be, and that we can see it clearly was. But thank you for your comment, and I do miss aspects of the old plaza. Tony, please.
Yeah, one of the things that, as you mentioned, is connectivity and the idea of getting essentially from Bushnell Park through a series of plazas down to the river. That was very, very important, I think, when they were designing the plaza. Frankly, I don't know that many people go up on the plaza, but at least it has more of the urban experience of a large open gathering space now, and it works better at that, so that might have been something that had to do with it.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I worked at Wadsworth Atheneum for years, and there was that big coping wall. I don't know what you call it, but that has been removed too.
Right.
And I think the greening of Prospect Street North has civilized it to some degree. I think it is more beautiful.
Bill, I see that Douglas has raised his hand. I want to see if he has anything to add to his question.
Please, yeah.
And then after that, I see Peter Bloom has raised his hand. So let's start with Douglas. Douglas, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, beautiful.
Oh my goodness, I didn't expect this. I already appreciate the moment that you gave to that. I am a big backer of the iQuilt effort to integrate the plaza. I just felt like it came off a bit more gray. The new vestibule was, I realized the old vestibule was undersized and leaking, but the new vestibule just doesn't seem to me to relate to the tower as much. I mean, on its own, the plaza has merit, but I just don't know that it works with the building as well. So that's what I was talking about.
Thank you, and I hear you, and I come at it. People that know my work with historic Hartford and other things know that I'm obsessed with making Hartford get its act together with tourism. And if I had a magic wand, I mean, this city could be doing 3 to 4 times the visitation it presently does, and all that would take was caring about that result. And we need to have a conversation about all that, but one of the things, if I had a magic wand, would be to get the tower open again, because it's so cool to go up there. And frankly, almost nobody knows this, but the state capitol was designed with tourists in mind. The cupola, the dome of the capitol is beautifully designed and situated to accommodate visitors. And I think a city that really aggressively pursued a tourism agenda would fix all those things.
Would someone get Bill a magic wand, please?
No.
Douglas, thank you for your question. Moving on, I think Peter Bloom, I don't see him listed on here anymore. He may have put his hand down. Peter, if you have a question, please do put your hand back up. I see that Jerry Murphy has a question.
Yeah, Jerry, hey.
Hi, how you doing?
Awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was wondering how they measured the height of the tower. I think it said 525 feet. Is it the top of the stonework, or do they include that skinny flagpole as well?
Well, now that is a good question, and I can promise you I do not have the answer. They probably, I don't know. But, look, this is a space race, and what was it, the Chrysler Building was the tallest building in New York for 15 minutes? And then the Empire, is that right, Tony?
Yeah, the Empire State Building actually built its spire inside, and then all of a sudden popped it out, just so that they were higher.
Whatever. I mean, but that, that's the skyscraper era.
Another question for Mary Beth Davidson. Mary Beth, you're on.
Hey.
Hello, whoops.
Hey. Loud and clear, I hear you.
I keep losing it. There I am. The tower was measured when it used to have those, it used to have something on the top of it with balls off the top, which blew down in 1996. So the 520 something feet was from the street level to the top of that spire that used to be on it. So
thank you so much. Mary Beth is, I worked with closely on this project. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have done it. She is the archivist there and has forgotten more than I'll ever know about Traveler's history.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Anything more?
nope.
Okay. Right, good.
Is it a wrap?
I have a question.
Oh.
You had showed that picture of the first umbrella, and I didn't catch like what era that was.
It predates the 60, I think about 62.
Okay.
Might even be 61.
Okay.
And so it was right. There's much ado about nothing, but I'm working on a project about the year 1963, which I think was the biggest hinge year of the 20th century in terms of all kinds of things. I won't go into that, but one of the things that's happening in 1963 is this explosion of pop art, conceptual art, abstract art. It was really a huge break.
We have a question from our next speaker in the series. This is Dr. Fiona Vernal.
Hey.
Hi, Fiona.
Hi.
Hey,
You're on.
here you go.
Yeah, I wondered, how did they, given your comment about the car and car insurance, I was wondering, did you notice any specific responses to the coming of the two highways?
Not in this project. I mean, and I've actually never researched that. I assume that would be a great topic. What the press and public were saying about these interstate highways, and as I'm sure we'll hear when you present in 2 weeks, I call it the Great Wall of China. Cut the north end off from downtown. As somebody who you can easily walk from this building, the old G. Fox building, to the Isham Terry House or Keeney Clock Tower in 5 minutes, maybe less. It is downtown, but people don't know it because there's a highway, and all those things can be designed, remediated to some degree, but it's a great question.
Thank you.
Do we have any, thank you, Fiona. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Do we have any more questions from out there or in here? Yes.
Yeah.
Just maybe a comment, and again, I don't know how the Travelers Tower, when you went through the spaces, you obviously showed some really wonderful historic spaces that seemed either restored or largely left untouched.
Yeah.
I just wonder how they deal with the employees. I know when I restored 79 Elm Street for Deep,
Right.
they made a decision to take some of the original prime office suites and create them as conference rooms so that any person that works at Deep can schedule them. So I'm just wondering if Travelers has that kind of approach to their
No, it's a
super
great question, and
spaces.
if Mary Beth is still involved, she would almost certainly know. My experience was that there were a lot of pretty authentic spaces, but obviously there are cubicles and different things that
Sure.
are done in different ways over different periods. I didn't show pictures of it, but one of the most amazing things were the executive dining rooms and the kitchen way up at the top of the tower, you know, where you could really have a banquet. It's pretty amazing.
We have a question from Jack Hale. Hello,
Hey, Jack.
Jack.
Oh, hi, Bill. Can you hear me?
Hey, absolutely.
I just wanted to mention that Good Shepherd has a World War II or World War I memorial plaque, a big one, probably about the same size as the Travelers one. It's in the base of the tower at the church.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I guess I've overlooked that when I've been over there, but you know, that's great. It's great to know. And, you know, it's for all of this pandemic nightmare, when you think of 50 million people killed on top of World War I and a world population that was what, a third or a quarter the size it is now, it's a math problem and a big one.
Thank you for your question,
Thank you,
Jack.
Jack.
We have a question from Mary Laporte.
Hey,
Hi,
Mary.
Mary.
Hi, Bill. I have a quick question. When you showed the first layout of the different parts of the building and the dates that they were added on to the complex of the Travelers Tower, there was one that was in 1958. And I wondered, prior to 1958, was that interior space some kind of a courtyard?
I'm sure of it. Again, Mary Beth would know better, but I think, yeah, as the building, yes, and I think they were filling in.
Okay. It seemed natural
Yeah.
to think that, but I'd never seen any photos or anything that showed an interior courtyard.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, certain angles and aspects are hard to photograph because they've been either overlaid with other additions.
Right.
It was like that crazy picture I showed of the Henry Ellsworth house, which by the time they were done with it, you'd have no clue it had ever been a house.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I thought there was another question. Was there Mary Beth? I see Jerry Murphy. Oh yeah, there's Mary Beth. Okay.
Hi, and just the question about the courtyard, when the tower was built, the middle of it was open so that you could have, and we filled it in 1960 about when we got air conditioning. So prior to that, you could open the windows and let the air go through. So.
Wow. Very
Wow.
interesting. Thank you. I see Jerry Murphy, is your hand still up?
Yeah,
Jerry,
I had a second quick question, because based on what Bill said earlier, I remember going to the tower up to the top in the 1980s, and I totally agree with you. It's an absolutely spectacular view, especially during the fall foliage season. I'm wondering if one of the reasons they closed it is because it is definitely not handicapped accessible. And I'm wondering if they will ever reopen it for that because of that.
I have no idea. I'm sure part of it is security too. It's just, we live in a world where everybody's, I don't know, don't ask me.
No, that's a good point. Things have changed from the 1980s, certainly.
But I certainly remember, I don't know when I was up there the last time as a tourist. It could have been the 90s, but it certainly was open in the 80s.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. I still see Fiona up. Fiona, I'm gonna put you on, see if you have a question. I also see Mary Laporte still having the hand raised. So, let's check with Fiona. Fiona, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, other than Neil Armstrong, if they had any other sort of famous contracts.
I'm sure they do. I mean, it's just, again, I maybe looked at 5% of the archives.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. And, you know, I don't know, if I were the director of the Connecticut Historical Society, I would be banging on their door constantly to borrow things to do a show, because it really, the material, there's so much content there.
That's a great idea. Do we have any more questions? All right, Bill.
I better mask up again before I get.
With his Connecticut flag mask.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Over and out.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.